Hey people, welcome to the Run Testers. It's Kieran here, and today I'm going to be looking at these. These are the Nurvv Smart Insoles. Now you can see these are sensor-laden smart insoles that track your every step when you're running. They are the latest smart insoles that claim to be able to help you run better and also avoid injury. Now that is a big claim, and these guys come with a pretty hefty price tag to match that. They are £249 in the UK and $300 in the US. So, can they really transform your running that well? And do they do it better than other existing products that are in the market? These are not the first smart soles we've seen. They are not the only product that wants to help you improve your running form. But do they do it better? And do they warrant that quite hefty investment in your running? Can you really see those genuine improvements? We have been testing these for a couple of months now, and we've gone into great detail, and our short answer really is, I'm afraid not. These come up pretty wide of the mark as far as we're concerned. And in this video, we're going to go into some really good detail on why that is. So if you've never encountered a smart sole before, this is essentially what you're getting. A very thin insert that will go beneath the main insoles in your shoes. They feature a number of pressure sensors. These Nurvvs have 16 pressure sensors carefully placed, optimally placed around the foot to track your every movement when you're stepping and running. These will also then link up to something. They tend to have a tracker pod on the side, and this can have things like the Bluetooth technology in it, or the GPS technology that speaks to your phone. And essentially what's happening is these are tracking every single kind of movement of your feet. So you can see if your toes are hitting the ground first, you're striking with your midfoot, or your rear with the heel, all of those kind of things, and then transmitted via Bluetooth to a smartphone. And what that really enables is lots of real-time data, everything from distance, pace, all that kind of usual stuff you might get with a watch, but also some really interesting running form metrics. As I mentioned, kind of foot strike, but also you can have cadence, stride length. All of these kind of things come with smart soles. That translates really into helping you run more efficiently and actually sort of optimize things like pace, cadence, all of those things, improving your running form, but also to help avoid injury. So let's have a little bit of a closer look. So I wanted to touch quickly on design. Now these are not the first smart soles that we have tested. We tested another pair that are a little bit older. These are out in the market first. These are called Arion Run. And they've got a very sort of similar setup really. You get smart insole inserts, a little attachment cable that takes you to a pod that clips on and off. In Arion Run, it's a sort of swivel clip. And here on the Nurvvs, you actually have a clip-on that's, interestingly, it's actually much harder than the Arions to get on and off. And that's one of the bugbears immediately with this. It's actually not that easy to clip them on and off. Nurvv had to do that in order to keep them secure so they wouldn't fall off and move about. But as you can see here, it's just a ball ache to take them on and off, to be honest. So what you get here is a sensor that looks like this. And the attachment. Now this bit clips down over your shoes. There's a little Velcro attachment and a little metal bar in here that kind of is supposed to hug the shoes. And that goes up and over your shoes. I've got a pair installed here, as you can see. So they clip on down the side of your shoes. You can see inside there, under the soles, and Bob's your uncle. Now, what you also get is you get a power switch on the inside. That switches them on. A couple of LED lights to tell you what sort of situation you are, whether they're paired or syncing. Same on the other device. And on this one, you also get a little depressed button here, which enables you to start the phone-free tracking. So you can run without carrying your phone with, and these will still record. There is built-in storage, so they still will record your run and track and sync later. So you can use it, that's quite handy. But on a design front, I think one thing that's major thing here is the soles here are infinitely better than the Arion Run soles. They are so much more durable. They've got a far more robust coating, and these were sort of fabric, and you can see sort of that these have already whittled away from very little use, and they didn't feel particularly well built. Even the cable here, if you compare those two cables, there's a big difference between the robustness and the protection. That's a big thing that Nurvv has improved on. Having said that, I think with Nurvv, another thing that I wanted to point out was this clip doesn't fit all shoes. So if you've got a particularly slim shoe, like a Nike Next Percent, something like that, you have to have an adapter to make this fit. So some of the top end shoes that have got thinner collars, these won't fit with. You'll have to buy a separate adapter. That's annoying. The other thing is if you use these with a particularly wide shoe and then go back to putting them on a slimmer shoe, they bend, and that hook that keeps it in place is really hard then to keep them put. And I can't force it back. And so over time with usage, that has become expanded and it doesn't sit as nice and snug on the shoe. And one of the things that Nurvv has told me themselves is if that isn't in place firmly, it can affect the accuracy and the reliability. So that is a big problem if you're moving between shoes. And I suggest if you're kind of runner who is going to be investing in a set of soles like these that really get down into the minutiae of your running form and technique, you're probably also going to be a kind of runner who rotates their footwear depending on what they're running, how fast, what kind of sessions they're doing. So that is a big problem. Smart soles are also fiddly to move between shoes. There's no getting around that. The form factor and the design that's inherent with using smart soles rather than a foot pod or something else is that if you want to swap them between shoes, it's a pain. You know, it's an extra little bit of faff that you have to do before runs. And as small as that is, we runners are pretty good faffers, and we don't really need extra things to have to put us off going out for a run, I don't think anyway. So aside from the button to power them on, the lights, and that button to do phone-free tracking, everything else with the Nurvv is done via the smartphone. When you power them up, they should auto-connect to the app. They should recognise the sensor there and ready to go. You shouldn't have to reconnect each time. I will say that if you're someone who hates waiting around for your GPS watch to get a satellite fix, these are worse than that. They do take quite a while. When you fire up the app and go to hit record, they search for the sensors and they say, you know, enabling sensors, whatever the message is, and it can take them up to a minute to actually be ready as the percentages rock up. So of course not everyone has the same size feet or shoes, and the Nurvvs do come in different sizes and they come in half sizes. So in the UK, in the men's, you'll get from a 5.5 up to a 14, and in women's, you'll get a 2.5 to 12. Which is pretty handy. So the soles themselves also are only 1.2 millimeters thick, so you don't notice them once they're in under your normal insoles. They just kind of disappear. What you do notice, however, is the size of the trackers on the outside of your shoes. I mean, you can see this. Literally everyone I've bumped into whilst I've been wearing this has asked me if I'm being tracked with a police tag. And as you can see, the Nurvv trackers are actually really a lot chunkier than you'll get with the Arion Run, and they do look pretty cumbersome on the shoe. So when it comes to weight, the trackers and the soles together will add 70 grams to the weight of each of your running shoes. Now, if you look at something like a Peg Turbo 2, that's going to be a 30% additional weight on one of the shoes. And studies have shown that actually just adding 100 grams extra weight to a running shoe can affect your performance by up to 1%. So that's a decent margin. Something like the Stryd foot pod only adds something like 9 grams, and I think the Arion Runner are around 40 grams. So there's significantly more weight that you're going to have added to your shoe with the Nurvv. So in the tested durability stakes, the trackers are IPX7 rated, so that's dust, dirt, water, sweat proof. So those things will hold up fine. The soles haven't been rated, and Nurvv told us they haven't done that because there's almost no fair rating for a product like this. So we take them on their word, and we've actually put these through a lot of miles, lots of puddles, lots of mud, sort of ankle deep mud, and they've actually held up fine so far. So we have no reason to kind of question that. Now, I've been using Nurvv for 2 or 3 months. I haven't been using it as intensely as somebody might actually over that period because I've been testing other products. But the charging cable no longer charges. Basically, the USB connector is loose, it wobbles, and it's actually pulled out when you pull it out. So now the trackers don't charge on the unit. And you know what it is? You can see when you're taking the trackers off, it actually sort of slightly edges that charging unit apart because they're so stiffly clipped onto it. It's quite hard not to pull that apart, and that has affected the way that the USB connector goes into the charger, and they are no longer charging. So in terms of life expectancy, according to Nurvv, these should last you the equivalent of 3 pairs of running shoes. Now, if you go on the theory that running shoes last anywhere between 300 and 500 miles, that means you're looking at 900 to 1500 miles before you have to replace these. Now, that, based on a 40-mile week, I think at its worst case scenario is going to be 22 weeks, and best case is 37.5 weeks. Now, you can buy new soles for $59.99, and those will work with your existing trackers. But when you've already spent $249.99, I think that longevity of this product and the fact that you're going to have to replace it is a bit of a problem. You're going to get far more life out of other products like a watch or a foot pod. So the Nurvv, the stats you get are cadence, foot strike, for heel, mid or forefoot. You also get step length, you get pronation and balance. So how even you are when you're running with your kind of your foot contact and things like that. You also get kind of a selection of regular running stats such as pace and distance, but that is it. It's very much focused on your form and your running health and efficiency from a biomechanical point of view. All of the other stuff that you might expect and might like is not there. There is no heart rate. You can't even pair in a heart rate sensor. I'm actually just going to flip to the list because there's so many things here that are missing. There's no heart rate connectivity or data. So that means there's no heart rate zone training. There are no training plans. There's no running power, which is something that from the foot a lot of other products would seek to do. There's no training effect, there's no recovery insights, there's no fitness progress. Even simple things such as elevation data in the post-run stats are missing. It also doesn't sync to Strava or to Zwift. For 250 quid, most watches will do a lot of these things and more. And actually the worrying thing for Nurvv is that, you know, although the way that they present the data around your running health, which we'll come on to later, is different and it is quite unique, I don't think it's enough to charge that price. It's not strong enough, there's not enough of it. It needs to hook into other things that we like to use as runners to make it a kind of a really important part of our runs, and it's not. This is very much an accessory. So I'm sure, you know, you can say to me, Kieran, well, we wouldn't expect Nurvv to have all of these features. That's not really a fair expectation for a product like this. And then I would point to you something like the Stryd foot pod, which is £199 and has a far, far bigger range of general running features and some form and efficiency and injury features that are just far richer and actually I think far more useful. And I think that's just a real gap for Nurvv. And yes, they may well fix it, and they have sort of spoken to me and said, look, a lot of this stuff is on the roadmap. But if I could take a minute off my PB for every time I'd had a manufacturer of a product tell me about a new feature that's coming down the line on their roadmap and then not delivered it, then I would be giving Eliud Kipchoge a run for his money for sure. For foot strike, you do get something interesting. You get a heat map which shows where each of your feet has been striking the ground, and it will give you kind of a percentage and almost like a heat map style foot strike for fore, mid and rear foot. I mean, this stuff is initially interesting, but actually over time, you know, unless you're really hell-bent on changing the way your feet strike the ground, which is a huge debate about whether or not it's a positive thing to try and do that or not, then it really just becomes a little bit of extra gloss rather than something that's genuinely really useful. Now, the other thing that we wanted to say is that we did a test with this where we deliberately ran a mile almost up on our tippy toes trying to get the forefoot strike. And the Nurvv actually still read that we had, I think it was something like 86% was in the midfoot to heel strike, even though we'd been running up on our tippy toes. So I have big question marks over whether or not these things are actually accurate at all. With pronation, we also had two runs where we hit 88% and 78% neutral pronation. But interestingly, kind of Nurvv chalked up those as a low level of neutral pronation. It describes it as a low level of neutral pronation, which is a negative thing. It's supposed to be a higher level of neutral pronation. Even the language that's used around that I find particularly kind of confusing. And they also don't contextualize that. So, you know, 78 and 88% doesn't sound too bad, particularly if you've got a run that doesn't necessarily take in fully even ground all the time. I just don't think the feedback's necessarily as clear. And there's a problem with this in the entire app, actually, where it's trying to deliver very, very detailed biomechanical information to people. And it doesn't really feel like it's very easy to incorporate into your training or to understand exactly what you have to do. So let's get into those big headline features, and biggest of all is probably running health. Now, what running health aims to do is to make it easier to avoid things like overtraining and injury by focusing on some key injury-related metrics over time. Now, there are 4 metrics that it looks at: training load, pronation, cadence and balance. And you get a high, good, average, poor or bad reading for each of those based on the last 2 months run data. And you can go deeper into each area. There's also an overall kind of running health score that you can track. It's out of 100 and it comes in a really nicely presented chart that makes it easy to spot areas for improvement at a glance. So one of the big things we wanted to talk about with training load is the limitations, really. So because it's only really looking at the number of miles essentially that you've clocked up in a 7-day period versus your last 28, and not taking into account any of the physiological readouts that might come with heart rate or muscular load that devices like the Polar or the Garmin do. It's a pretty blunt instrument really in terms of telling whether or not you're loading on too much, and you can really get far more detailed insights elsewhere. The other thing that it doesn't really do is look at what happens in between your sessions, between your running. So things like your sleep, your overnight recovery, your kind of heart rate variability, all of these things that look at how well you've responded to a round of training, which could dictate how hard you really want to go again the next time. So whilst devices like Polar and Garmin, based on heart rate, are not perfect in this sphere. They're not giving you 100% super reliable information. They are doing a huge amount more to look at you in the round as a runner than the Nurvv currently can. We should also say that actually the immediate post-run readouts for training load often contradicted that which you've got in the health section, and so that was sort of confusing as well. Again, another point of confusion in a somewhat confused app. So in the running health section, you also get an 8-week average pronation score that shows whether you're under, neutral or over pronation for each foot. So that's accompanied by an overall pronation score and a bad to good chart of your progress, and some fairly basic recommendations for steps you can take to fix any issues. So in running health, you also get a separate reading for balance. Now this will look at cadence, foot strike, pronation and step length, and essentially what it's doing is showing up if you've got any imbalances from left to right in the way that you're running. The charts here are really detailed, but they're pretty hard to decipher, to be honest. There is some in-app advice to help you work on problem areas, but this also sort of feels too limited. So this makes us think actually of an old device we used to love called the Lumo Run. Now the Lumo Run, after a run, used to flag up where you had areas that needed to be worked on. It would then provide you in the app with a bunch of video drills that you could do to help work on those areas. Next time out on the run, you'd get recommended to do a run that was coached, also looking at those specific areas, and the whole thing felt really well knitted together. This is something that Nurvv doesn't really do. You've got a little bit of kind of written text, a few tips that are written, not that easy to understand, and then maybe some links out to some other web content, and it doesn't really feel like a seamless experience that genuinely helps you beyond what you might be able to read around out there normally. And the final piece of the puzzle in that running health score is cadence, with a focus on a higher cadence being better to avoid injury, and that rounds out how your health score is calculated. So in theory, having all of this information at your fingertips should be a great thing to help you improve your running and potentially avoid injury. But there's a few problems here. The first is that it all feels a little bit disconnected, and it doesn't feel like there's lots of actionable advice that you can go and grab and see in the app and then try and apply to your runs. It also often feels really complex in terms of interpreting what the data means and laying that back to you when you go out and try and do your different training runs. If you're not really well versed in biomechanics, I don't think you're going to really like what you see here. It certainly isn't any good for a beginner runner as far as I'm concerned. I've been running for 10 years. I've tested lots and lots of different products in this sphere, and I'm pretty well versed in the kind of biomechanics side of running, and this still baffles me at times. So I wanted to talk to you about Pace Coach. This is another of the main features that you get on Nurvv. It's the only feature that offers real-time coaching. You'll need your headphones and to carry your smartphone in order to access this. And essentially what it's doing is taking stride length, cadence, and a pace target and putting those all together and trying to encourage you to increase either your cadence or your stride length to hit a new target pace. Because at some point, in order to run faster, essentially you have to increase cadence or you have to increase stride length. What you actually get though is something that is essentially, it's really confused. It's not only confused in how you set up your benchmark runs, because there's zero guidance about how to do that, how far to run, how fast to run, or what effort you should run, or in fact how often you should do these benchmark runs. That's confusing for a start. And then post-run, what you get is a score called Run Score. Now this Run Score has a sort of slightly confusing number attached between 0 and 100, and that number is basically trying to put a figure on how hard you've run. Next time you go out to do another Pace Coach run, you can select that run and you'll see the score, and you can slide a toggle bar up and down. When you slide the toggle bar up, essentially what happens is your pace will decrease, the target pace will decrease, and your step length and your cadence will change. So it'll give you new targets for step length and cadence to try and hit that new pace. You can also toggle it down. So if you wanted to do a recovery run, you could arguably slide it the other way, and those metrics will change as well. It's so strange to have it all conflated like that for me. You know, if I'm going to go and work on my cadence, I kind of want to just be focusing on working on my cadence. If I'm going to work on my stride length, I quite want to work on my stride length. I don't really get the idea of having a pace target being the anchor point for all of those things rather than separating them out. And actually, when you get down to practice of doing one of those Pace Coach runs where you've got the coach in your ear, hitting the stride length and the cadence is very, very hard. We're talking about very, very fine margins here. And in the test that I did, essentially I ended up with the coach barking at me every 20 seconds. And the whole experience was intensely negative. And I've not really wanted to go back and do it again. What's even more frustrating is that you can't change the frequency of the coaching updates And that is basically going to make this way too naggy for most people. And bearing in mind, this is one of the main features that Nurvv offers, it's really not up to scratch. So one other thing I wanted to touch on quickly here is accuracy. So Nurvv makes big claims on its website about it being kind of world-leading accuracy. That combination of GPS tracking and sensor data coming from and motion data coming from the insoles, and it's supposed to make this kind of much better or more accurate than your running watch. Now, in our tests, it did match up pretty well with the Stryd foot pod and our Garmin Fenix 6 in most cases, but actually we had some weird anomalies where, for example, we did a half marathon, a marked course half marathon, and it tracked way below the half marathon distance. And interestingly, it had a bit of a spasm when we went into a tunnel. Now, this is when Nurvv is supposed to really come into its own. It's supposed to be able to handle that, whereas a GPS watch couldn't. What actually happened is the GPS watch, when we got out the other side of the tunnel, fixed itself, whereas the Nurvv ended up reading 2 miles too short in the half marathon distance. So when it comes to battery life, Nurvv says you'll get 5 hours running from a single charge. We found that kind of roughly accurate, although one of the trackers always ran down quicker than the other. And in some cases, one example, yesterday we went out and our pod on the phone told us that we had 57 minutes running with 18% battery life left. It actually lasted all of about 14 minutes before it bottled out. Also, one thing that we found, the pods are supposed to auto power down when you leave them stationary for a while. They are not doing that in our tests. They sort of stay on. And what seems to happen, unless you actually force close your app, they seem to still be talking to the app. And that means they think that they're still going to be required and they stay powered up. So you lose battery life after that. Eventually they will shut off, but not as quickly as they are supposed to. So you will get battery drain with that, and that is another frustration with these. So the big question, should you buy Nurvv? Well, in short, no. Simple answer is I wouldn't recommend these, not at all at the moment. Now, I kind of salute the ambition with this tech. I'm always a big fan of new tech that's trying to do something different and break new ground. But there's a few problems here. The first is the form factor of smart soles. Other people have tried this before, and it's always a problem. Moving them between shoes, having big hulking great pods attached to the side of your running shoes isn't really ideal. That is not Nurvv's only problem though. The other thing here is this product is confused. It doesn't really know if it's for beginner runners or if it's for really advanced athletes, and it sort of goes somewhere in between. The information that it gives you is actually quite complex. The usability of it is very, very limited and actually quite poor. But actually then beyond that, the number of features in the feature set is actually too limited. So there's almost too complex information here for a beginner runner, but not enough features for an advanced runner. The price tag also, if you're going to be spending £250 on what is essentially something that is just an accessory, it doesn't do enough on its own to replace a watch, it has to be a supplementary product. That is a lot of money, and I would suggest that you're going to be a fairly serious runner, particularly when you look at the biomechanical kind of information that's wrapped into that kind of injury prevention and your overall running health and the coaching. It's quite involved. You're not going to be a couch to 5k runner. So put that in the context of the fact that a lot of the information that Nurvv is offering is also available elsewhere, and it's available elsewhere on cheaper products or existing products that we might already be using, like a running watch. Now, the way that information is presented is slightly different. Garmin won't come forward and say we've got a running health score, but you can dive into other running metrics and you can see and pull things together and work out for yourself. And I think the final thing to say, even when it comes to that running health picture, the information that you're getting is actually just at the moment kind of reading data. So it will tell you about pronation, it might tell you about foot strike, but actually with terms of actionable guidance as to what you do about that, you still have to go outside. You have to go and read a long article on a website, or you're going to have to go and find somebody else who can help you fix some of the problems that it might show up. Now, I don't think it's going to show up those problems any more than it might if you look at a running watch data or other accessories. And that's really the problem here. It doesn't really solve many problems. It kind of gives you some information that might be useful, but there isn't enough. It's not going far enough to be a really, really good tool for improving your running or fixing inherent problems in your running style. And for that reason, I just would not recommend it. So all things considered, it's really hard to see how Nurvv offers value for money. The app experience is limited, a little bit buggy, a little bit complicated to understand. The hardware is kind of okay, but a little bit impractical and a bit frustrating to use compared to swapping a foot pod across. And actually that price tag is really quite high. So I think personally, if you're going to spend £250, you're probably better off either on spending it on a coach looking at investing in a more highly spec running watch, or going for something like a foot pod or a Coros pod that can give you some biomechanic details that will actually enhance your run and be less complicated.